So I'd love to welcome our panelists today to talk about the connections between parking reform and the abundance movement. My name is Daniel Harrigus. I'm the policy director at PRN. And we have with us Giselle Hale of Abundance Network, Marc Vukcevich, excuse me, of Streets for All, and Councilmember Qadri from Austin, Texas. So I'm going to invite each of our panelists, for starters, to take a couple of minutes and just, introduce yourself. How do you get into the work you're doing, and what do you do, or what does your organization do? And we will start with Giselle.
All right. Thanks for having me. Super excited to talk about this topic. So, I'll start with Abundance Network. We are a 501(c)(3) membership organization. We're focused on organizing the next generation of civic leaders who want to drive real outcomes in their communities. So, within this nascent abundance movement, we really see ourselves as the doers. So, we're looking to take these ideas from Substacks and white papers into real world outcomes. Our elected network, which is one of our networks, is just 8 months old. It has already grown to about 150 members in 32 states, entirely through word of mouth, most often through partners like a PRN or members themselves. And Zoe is actually one of our members, referring each other, which we really value. Our members are mayors, council members, county commissioners, entirely focused on local government. And we provide them with learning opportunities with experts, support, peer support, that's a biggie, a selective fellowship that's just kicked off. And then we also recently launched a new set of member tools that includes an abundance bot, which can help them find examples of great abundance policy, but also implementation ideas from their peers in the network. So that's a little bit about the network, a little bit about me. I had a long private sector career, and I actually got interested in the topic of housing when my newly wedded husband and I moved to the Bay Area and learned that we could not afford to live on our own without roommates. So we spent the first 5 years of our marriage living with roommates, and we really had to delay starting a family. So that led me to reading Planning Commission meeting minutes, which led me to applying when I had a 5-week-old to the Planning Commission. And it escalated quickly from there. Next thing you know, I'm on the city council, finally getting sworn in as mayor. So I served Redwood City for about 9 years in a variety of roles, all while raising two young girls. And really proud that when I ended my service, my city earned the governor's pro housing distinction, which is a distinction for cities who achieved outsized housing impacts. So excited to have this conversation with all of you. Parking reform was definitely a part of my journey, and I'm sure it's part of yours too.
Thank you. Marc, let's go to you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marc Vukcevich, he, him. I'm the Director of State Policy for Streets for All. And if you're not familiar with Streets for All, we're based in California. We started in Los Angeles, a place that I think desperately needs a lot of work on transportation and land use policy. But the bulk of my work is in the California State Legislature and looking at California as a whole. Not to say that anything that I'm going to talk about is really specific to California. I think that the things that we're going to be talking about in this panel are really relevant across the whole country. The things that we focus on are transportation policy, trying to get more people to bike, walk, take public transportation, and then also to have a land use that supports those modes. And so this year, we worked on a landmark housing bill that you may have heard of. If you're in California, you probably heard of it. If you're not, it was our big transit-oriented development bill. And I think we'll tee this up a little bit later, and I'll let I don't want to get ahead of Daniel, but I think some of the interesting nexuses between this work and the abundance movement and the abundance sort of ideology and conversation is one of thinking about the way that government really works and doesn't. And there's times when government needs to get out of the way, and there's times that the state actually needs capacity to do good things. And thinking about that balancing act is a huge part of the work that I do, and frankly, I think a huge part of the transportation work altogether. So, thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Glad to have you here. Last but not least, can we hear from Councilmember Qadri?
Great. Well, I'm so excited to be on this chat today. My name is Councilmember Qadri. Proudly represent District 9 on the Austin City Council, which includes downtown, the university area, which I know a lot of folks from the UT area are still sad about not being on the college football playoff, and I know both from an area where a university is going. So my heart is still aching a bit, but represent the UT area and some of the most active neighborhoods in the city. I got into this work because I deeply care about people. I care about making sure that Austin really lives up to its values of being accessible, being equitable, and being welcoming. I moved to the city almost 17 years ago, and I got into this work also because I didn't always feel like Austin is all the things that I just listed. And I want to make sure Austin is a city that works for folks, that works for everyone. And I have a almost 4-month-old at home now, and I want to make sure that Austin works for him and works for, hopefully he's in this city for a long time and it works for his kids. So my office and myself, the past 3 years and looking forward, continue to work on issues like transportation, continue to work on issues like land use. My office heavily works on mobility. I'm currently the vice chair of mobility at the city of Austin, and also sit on the Campo and Cab Metro boards. And we really want to make sure that it's the easiest city to get for folks to get around. And then on parking reform, our office led the item on eliminating parking mandates citywide. So I just see a real opportunity for us to update our outdated rules and make sure that Austin and hopefully the country is as walkable and transit friendly as possible. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Very thankful to see a lot of familiar faces, and shout out to all the folks from Austin who are on the call.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to kick us off. Thanks everyone for your introductions here. But by digging in right into the question of what is abundance, because it's been a little bit of a buzzword that has really entered the national conversation in the last year or two. And I think, there's a book, there was a conference, there's a lot of pundit chatter, and there may actually be divergent definitions in our attendees' minds here of what abundance actually means or what the abundance movement is, just because of sort of all the talk. And a very live debate out there, I know, including at the abundance conference that happened earlier this year, about sort of what are the boundaries of an abundance agenda, who is or isn't in the tent. Um, so to establish sort of a baseline for this conversation, I'm going to ask a couple of our panelists here, maybe starting with Giselle Hale. How do you define abundance? What is abundance? And if you're an abundance-minded elected official, what does that mean?
Yeah. Is it loud? I just noticed there's some noise in the background, or can you hear me okay?
You're
Good.
crystal
Okay,
clear.
great. So I want to start by saying abundance is not a new idea. It has a new name. Okay. So I know this because one of the most common things I see when someone applies to our network, one of our elected officials applies, is they say, there's finally a name for what I do. I've been doing this for a long time. Now there's a name for it. And I think there's a lot of city staff and a lot of advocates who feel this way too. I will go on record as saying the power of the book was in giving this work a name. When you have a name, you can have an identity. And when you have an identity, you can form a community. And that's exactly what we are working to do with the Abundance Elected Network. At its most basic level, abundance is really about centering government around the question of what do people need more of and how do we help them to get it. And somebody just said, sometimes that means you get out of the way. Sometimes that means you build capacity. In wonk speak, there's really sort of two paths this goes down. One is about supplying the public with what they need. And the other is about state capacity or government efficiently delivering on those goods. In real life, what does that mean? It means like having affordable housing options and access to childcare and ways to get around your community that are affordable and accessible, elder care, healthcare, energy. What I love about abundance, it is that it is a flexible framework. It is a problem-solving framework that you can apply to whatever's happening in your community. It's also not an ideology. It's a methodology and it's a mindset. And so in our group, we actually see a lot of diversity on the political spectrum. It's more about, hey, I want to solve a problem in my community, and this is how I think I can get it done. We talk about there being 5 core skills I won't go into depth on these, but just to give you a sense, there's this supply side focus, right? This is a make more mentality. If we're playing a game of musical chairs, someone with an abundance mindset would simply look to add more chairs, not decide who gets the scarce few. Debottlenecking. We're really drawing here from the work of Jen Polka and others, which means really digging into the source of a problem, making trade-off analysis, capacity building. This is about staffing, hiring, procurement, the not sexy parts about making government work that matter. And then finally, a big one is they are outcomes obsessed. So this is a biggie. A lot of elected officials, and I would say I went through this experience myself, you're primed to celebrate the vote passing. You're primed to celebrate. I whip the votes. You pat yourself on the back. You're like, I passed that thing. I passed that thing. We treat that as the starting line or as a milestone. That's not the finish line. The finish line is, did you check your math? Did you actually solve the problem for which that policy was designed for? If you haven't, you got to go back through one of those other 5 areas. So that's what we think about. We always ask our members when they apply, or applicants, to demonstrate one of these skills and these values and how they're working in their work that they're doing. And we ask them why they want to join. Almost all the time, what they're looking for is other people like them. This is lonely work. Change is not easy, right? Being the person in your community that's trying to build, that is trying to change the built infrastructure, is hard work. And so it takes a lot of courage and encouragement, and that's what we look to provide.
I can chime in, Daniel, if you'd like,
Please.
on
Yes,
that
please do.
question. Uh, my answer will be brief, but it's I think Giselle's answer was so awesome because it like comes from someone who's an abundance practitioner, from someone who works the abundance network. But I think, to me, what abundance is sort of the simple recognition that when government cannot achieve good things for its citizenry, that's deeply wrong. I think that too often I see municipal, regional, county, and state governments as simply institutions to maintain. And maintain, and I don't even mean that they do that well, but maintain decisions from 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago, rather than doing the things that our society needs to do now. And so thinking about the ways that our government can achieve for its populace in a way that is direct, efficient, cost efficient, and responsive to the way that the things that the people want. That's, to me, what abundance fundamentally is.
I could also chime in super quickly. I think hearing from Giselle just now, but also in my time on council so far, I think abundance just gives us a more optimistic lens on things, right? It gives us something to fight for and not something to fight against, right? When I think of conversations that have happened in Austin on city council, I think around things around housing, around mobility needs, around public spaces and opportunity. And I think it's just around like what, the best of Austin, right? In my case, it's about the possibility. It's about bringing people together. Thinking about the item that we passed around parking. That wasn't me. That wasn't my office. That was folks who gave such a labor of love to the city of Austin for years and years and years before I ever even thought about running for office. And it was folks coming together and coalitions coming together that were built on hope. Hope for this concept because this concept led to better outcomes for its residents. So I think at its core, the abundance movement is just centered around hope and what's everything that's possible and just opening the door to a better Austin or to a better country or better wherever your home is.
Yeah, I want to dig in a little more to Austin's reforms, because I've followed them kind of from afar over the years. In my previous job at Strong Towns before I was at PRN, one of the first things I ever wrote was a look at the Code Next process as it kind of fell apart back in 2018. Um, and zoning reform, there was the big ambitious proposal, really politically contentious in the community and kind of acrimonious. And then to look back a few years later and be like, Austin is now like we at PRN constantly point to Austin as a national model. Not just, I mean, because Austin's the largest major city to fully eliminate off-street parking mandates. But also, yeah, just the mindset in which it seems like there's been consensus building, on the council around the need to have this forward-thinking vision of opportunity. What is Austin going to look like for, as you said, the next generation? I'm curious how you've seen, outside of yourself and your colleagues on the council, how have you seen the public discourse around this, around land use and transportation policy evolve in Austin? And do you think that the abundance mindset is a big part of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also just sorry, I just want to. I would be remiss not to say this. I myself and my colleagues had an opportunity to go to Boston and talk to them about a lot of the great work that we had done, and we heard from some Boston City Council members just Friday that they're bringing forward an item to eliminate parking in Boston. So I just wanted to give a shout out to I don't know if anyone on here is from the city of Boston or any neighboring city, but it was great to see that Austin often in Texas, often living in Texas, we see like god awful policies of the state that are replicated in other states, and that just always breaks my heart. But when we do good stuff, especially as it relates to making people's lives easier, it really does warm my heart. So whether it's Boston or I've had an opportunity to chat with a council member in Honolulu, Hawaii, who talked about bringing forward an item to eliminate parking in Honolulu. It's really exciting. But yeah, to answer your question around I guess the mindset of people. I think a lot of the work that we've been able to get done, it's people who came before us on council, right? There's a former council member in Austin, Chris Riley, who passed away not too long ago, who I think laid a lot of the groundwork for myself and many of my colleagues. And I think we've seen Austin become a place where the news the news headlines are always around the lack of affordability and people being priced out. And I think it's the pain of failed policies or the lack or the inaction of the past that kind of drove myself and many folks who are currently on the dais to run for office. Myself and two others joined the council in 2023, and it's through the voices of so many the tens of thousands of folks who voted for us, who wanted to see change, who wanted to see their city work for them. That's what's kind of pushed a lot of these wins. It's all the people that had worked when none of this was a possibility, and still kind of chipped away at it. And then we saw election happen in 2022. We've seen an election happen in 2024. That's I think really unlocked a lot of really great stuff as it relates to we have a code that hadn't been updated since 1984, our land development code. We have a lot of issues as it relates to mobility. In my opinion, we're 20 years behind on where we should be as it relates to mobility. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if I'm answering your question at this point. I feel like I'm rambling, but all the great work that we've been able to get done, it's just because of people. It's because of advocates and activists who have been grinding for so many years. And I think it's because of them when we look at big items that have passed on this council, whether it be there was an item called home, which folks can, if they already don't know about it, can look up, ETOD, or things like eliminating parking requirements. Like that's all due to people who are just kind of sick and tired of the city not working for them. And I think folks in Austin deserve a city that works for them. So.
I want to get into a little more kind of policy meat here, beyond, this philosophical idea, this approach of government should actually like try to meet people's needs and try to solve their problems. Getting into transportation abundance in particular, I think I'd love to hear one or more of our panelists, maybe starting with you, Marc, articulate, how exactly is parking reform and abundance policy, and what does abundance mean in the context of transportation policy? I think the term is often associated with housing and pro-housing movements where like, yeah, housing should be abundant. We should have lots of it. Which doesn't translate in quite as neat a way at least in a superficial way, to, we should have lots of transportation options. We should have lots of mobility. Well, like abundant transportation on its face could mean 10 lane freeways to everywhere, right? Parking reform, in terms of what it is we're actually doing, is maybe not quite so obviously an abundance policy. So I'd love to kind of hear the connection spelled out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you're on this webinar, you believe in parking reform and think of it as something that's quite important. Um, and the way that I think about it fundamentally is that cities need to work and cities need to function, and the curb needs to be managed. They need to be managed for economic prosperity. It needs to be managed for fairness. It needs to be managed for access. And when you're not in a world where the curb can be managed, when you're in a world where you're putting artificial constraints on development, you end up sort of you end up creating process, you end up creating urban forms you don't like, and you end up creating a world that I think is not structured towards efficient transportation because parking takes up a lot of space. And so um, I don't want to be the guy who just like I just came back from a trip, but I just came back from Taiwan a few days ago, and I'll tell you that like a lot of people still drive, like a ton of people still drive, but the thing that I think like was managed quite well was the way that people parked, and that's what made their transportation system like that. That's what made the subway system more attractive than driving, frankly. Not, I mean, yes, the subway system's fantastic. Um, but I want to answer the second part of your question, Daniel, or like the part that related to like where you see this with housing and transportation. You know, I'm not here to start like a rivalry with the housing world. We sponsored a housing bill last year. And so, but the housing world is really interesting because it's like to me, generally, not always, but generally the policy for abundance has been like getting government out of the way. Like you need to let the private sector develop housing, and you could put there could be affordability requirements, there could be other land use and building codes, etc. But the transportation side of things is you actually need to make government start to be effective. You need to say that I was just looking at a slide deck before I jumped on this call that showed a bike lane in Los Angeles taking 7 years to be built. A bike lane. We went to the with dedicated abundance mindset energy. We went to the moon in 10 years. And yet we can't build a bike lane in an efficient amount of time. Like, what does that mean for the people, the working class people who need that bike lane, or the people who just want to ride their bike safely in Los Angeles? And so I think the ways that we need to make sure our government is working and really understanding, like, yeah, I could be frustrated at the 7 years, but really understanding why. Like, why did it take 7 years is what makes me a good abundance advocate in the transportation system, in a system that is just clogged by bureaucracy and acronyms up the wazoo and different funding systems and different decision makers, some of which are in charge and some of which aren't at sometimes. So I think that's the way you got to think about it when it comes to transportation.
I'm happy to speak to it being an abundance policy if you're interested in another
Please.
hot take. So I kind of think of this as like if you went to a restaurant with a full menu and they only served you one thing, you'd be like really pissed, right? You're like, but like, look at that over there. That's basically the system we live in today. It's like there's all these juicy other options that your community needs. I mean, go back to that definition I gave. What does your community need more of? How do you help them to get it? We have finite resources. There's a finite amount of land. There's a finite amount of money and funding. And this is about changing a policy that tells you and your community what you're going to do with that finite land and that finite resource. It takes away your power, your decision-making power, and it doesn't factor in your needs. And so it's really about going back to like these community needs. And I'll give you an example of I was on the planning commission and our staff actually came to us with one picture. I wish I had this picture. I tried to find it. I couldn't find it. It was a picture of a parking lot. It was a parking lot in the first phase of what was our new downtown precise plan, which was an infill plan that the previous council had approved. And it showed an empty parking lot. And they were like, look, we've implemented this building using these old requirements. And what we've ended up with is an empty parking lot. And we think that there are other things our community needs, particularly right here, which is a block away from Caltrain. And so they said to us, let's change this, for this entire area. which we did, and it worked great. It was also why I was a really enthusiastic supporter when I was a director on the Association of Bay Area Governments for the state version of that law, which was Laura Friedman's bill, AB 14. I don't know, Mark knows the number. But I think that a lot of cities are struggling with needs like space for childcare, new open space. We've talked about some of the transportation needs, bike lanes, somebody mentioned in the comments, right? Bus lane. Um, this is a classic, you're making a trade-off decision. And so when we frame it that way, and I want to give a big shout out to the combined efforts of Welcoming Neighbors Network. I see Felicity's on this call from local advocacy group, Anna Fahey at Sightline, Parking Reform Network have recently put out some top-notch messaging work on how you have this conversation in your community. Just because many of us have the passion, that doesn't mean that we know the best way to explain this to voters, and they know that now. So they've found that information. So highly encourage you, and I don't know if we can link to it in the comments, to check out that work because it's going to help all of us have more effective conversations about how to get this done.
I could make a quick comment, but I felt like Giselle nailed everything, so I'm just gonna kind of go off of some of the things that she had mentioned. But I think the whole concept of parking reforms opening up the possibilities for other things to be done. I think the word Giselle used was trade-offs. I think about what we've done. Here in Austin, the first vote on parking reform was brought forward by one of my colleagues, Councilmember Chudavella, who moved to eliminate parking for childcare facilities so that way, there'd be opportunity for green space for kids to play and, rather than have, this parking space. And, when I think of the item that we passed, we've heard many stories about folks wanting to be able to do, infill development or renovate a building for a store, but they couldn't make it work because of parking minimums. And now what we're seeing here in Austin are all these different types of projects once this item had passed, that are kind of popping up because of the lower parking ratios that their people are dealing with. So pickleball courts and street patios have become a big phenomenon in Austin, whether you love pickleball or not. So yeah, I mean, I think it's all been about trade-offs and the possibilities. I guess going back to the whole abundance concept, the possibilities that are kind of in front of us now that weren't before.
I'm one more question that I have, and then maybe we'll open it up to some questions from our audience. But there's such a contrast in tone and approach from what I hear when I hear abundance advocates, especially those dealing with local policy or who are in local elected office, about we're pragmatic, we're solving problems, we're not going in with a whole bunch of assumptions, but we're actually looking at like what are the trade-offs? How can we alleviate those? How can we make government work for people? Like it's this very like it makes me feel really good about the work of government just to like listen to people doing local abundance-minded policy. And the contrast between that and the national political environment right now, which is extreme acrimony, totally divergent versions of like what is even true, let alone what is desirable, and sort of partisan competition for its own sake, where every other potential goal of politics often seems to be subsumed into like, well, I want my team to win. So I'm curious. Um, I don't know. I kind of have a two-part question here, and I want to just let people riff on this. One, is the work of abundance, is there something inherently local about this, that it's best applied in local politics? And two is, when you're doing abundance work at the local level, is partisan competition a threat to that work? Do you see a concern that the work you all are doing will be subsumed into sort of zero-sum partisan politics, and that will prevent it from being effective?
I can start. Yeah. So first of all, to your point on the sort of the positivity, Daniel, I like to tell people my inbox is like the happiest place in the country right now. It's like, the Care Bears where like there's like hearts and rainbows shooting out of them. That's how I feel about my inbox because my inbox is filled with emails from local elected officials who are just trying to get stuff done. And it feels very productive and it feels idealistic and optimistic and hopeful, as somebody said. And so that's great, especially given the national framing that we're all working under. I don't think it's inherently local, but I will say this. There's a reason why we started with local. There's 130,000 local elected officials in this country. That is a very, very big number. And there are very, very few programs that are dedicated to supporting them once they are in office, not just getting them elected. Once you get into office, what are you going to do? How are you going to make the most of that moment? There's a lot of organizations that focus on Congress and legislatures. It's smaller in size. It makes sense. It feels very leveraged. But if you look at the book and a lot of abundance, where do we see the blockage? Local government, right? We're really good at this. I mean, I saw this during my time on council. I worked a lot on ADU policy, and so was the state. And it felt like it was a shell game. The state would pass a policy, and then the NIMBYs would find a way to block it. And then the state would pass another policy, and then they'd find a new way to block it. And we just went like that for like 5 years. They're really good at that. So why not go right to the source of the problem and work on that? It's also a place where you see people coming up from. So right now, three of our members are running for Congress, for example. So we know that it's a great training grounds for leaders and leadership. And I think the same thing is true of advocacy. I also think, and I think a little bit of what you're getting into here is the idea of like, can you be an abundant and a something else? I serve on the national board of EMB Action. I definitely identify as EMB, but what I feel abundance gives us is a framework for every problem. Like I like to imagine a world where we literally solve housing crisis. I think we can do this. We retire it as a problem. Well, guess what? There'll be another problem to solve after that. We're not going to not have problems. And what I want to have is a framework and a methodology and a group of people trained on how to solve problems. That's really what we're trying to get sharp at here, I think, as a set of leaders.
Yeah, I'll add. I will add that I don't think abundance is inherently a local sort of domain, for lack of better words. I would say, and I would say that there's actually like quite a few lessons, I think largely negative lessons to be learned from someone like Donald Trump and the way that like he is trying to look like he is achieving. For everything that I despise about the way that Donald Trump has treated immigration, that there's a way that the federal government is doing something that like it was doing before that I feel like feels like an achievement and feels like doing something for the sake of Donald Trump and his voters. And that's a way that I don't think I've seen on the other side of the aisle. And so I do think there's this sort of like I don't think abundance, how do I say this? I think abundance is most importantly local. I think that's the place to focus is locally. I think to Giselle's point, like building up that class of electeds is quite important. But the idea of government achieving and acting with purpose, like I said, I want to say one more thing. This is one I will actually genuinely credit Donald Trump for, like Operation Warp Speed, getting vaccines done. Like that was like a frankly abundance policy. And so the question is like, how can we do that for high speed rail? How can we do that for housing on a bigger scale? How can we do that about universal health care or childcare or whatever else it may be? Like those are the questions that I'm more interested in. But I think you have to recognize that like there is a place for government working at all levels. But I want to just say fundamentally, like I agree that like on the localism side of it, I think local is where people can kind of have a hope again for their local government. You can rise that next class of electeds who will make their way through county and state governments and eventually in Congress. And also, I think make people more inclined to like go to their mayor and their city council rather than sort of waves fist in the air and mad at Congress about their local street signal not working. And I feel like that's the way that sometimes our government is perceived by people who are not in the weeds sometimes.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add, I also don't think the abundance concept or abundance is inherently local, but I do think you see it a lot on the local level, and then at times it bleeds, kind of throughout. I was at the DNC in August of God, what year are we in now? In August of 24. And I had an opportunity to meet with Congressman Robert Garcia and his staff. Congressman Garcia is a former city council member and mayor from Long Beach, California. And we ended up just talking about parking at the United Center in between speakers. And it's stuff that it's stuff that he had worked on at the local level, and he obviously rose through the ranks. And I'm not sure what happened to it at the federal level, but he had brought forward a bill to eliminate parking. And he started the EMB caucus in DC. So, I think a lot of really great stuff happens at the local level. What I like to think, there's some folks who want Austin to be, the Austin of 50 years ago, which doesn't entirely make sense. I think the best version of Austin is the one that we're currently in. And I think that the better versions of Austin are where we're going, right? Like I like to think that when, we're able to have an Austin where folks can afford to live here, and we have, light rail throughout the city, and we have all these other great projects coming to life, like Cap and Stitch, that's going to be like the best Austin yet. Unfortunately, there's folks that don't believe that, but I think the vast majority of folks appreciate local government. They appreciate the work that we do. We here in Texas don't have a state government that always works for us, but I think at the state and county level is where I think we can do a lot of good. And I also want to give flowers where they're due. There's folks on this call who have done such great stuff, advocating, making their voice heard at the local level, but also going to the state and working with state house and state senate Democrats, but also state house and state senate Republicans, because I think there's a lot of places as it relates to housing that we can see eye to eye.
I'd love to open it up to questions from our audience. We got a lot of participants here today. I think the best thing to do would be to either type your question in the chat box, or if you'd rather ask it out loud, you can use the raise hand button in your Zoom toolbar. And I'll call on you to unmute and ask your question that way. And I see a hand up. Isabella, please.
So first of all, thank you so much for having this event. And I feel like parking policy, is really well studied, really understood in the sort of like land use policy wonk world. I think what I'd like to better understand is, now that you've, talked to a lot of electeds, how much has that percolated into sort of public opinion? I mean, it's hard for me to judge like how politically viable real parking reform is. Things like pricing, rationing, reducing, really rigorously looking at the trade-offs. And I just love to hear sort of what the public, I know what the policy want perception is. I'd love to better understand what you're finding the public perception is, and how to message these sort of ideas effectively. I know that's a two-part question.
Yeah, I can do I can take a stab at it at first. So public perception, and I'm thinking about when we first brought forward the concept of eliminating parking or limiting parking mandates. A lot of folks were confused, had no idea what that meant, or there were folks who were reaching out to our office, having us come to their neighborhood or on their block and saying, "Where am I going to park my car? You're taking away parking," right? Or they were looking at places before the item even passed, before the item was even brought forward on the dais, that, oh, I can't park anywhere because of what you did. And I'm like, hold on. A, the item hasn't passed. B, it wouldn't affect already existing parking. It simply would allow future developments. It would allow the developer to, get as much parking as needed, and not have an overabundance of parking. So, I think the initial conversations and initial pushback was just this fear of the unknown. And people honestly probably already didn't like what the council was selling, right? They didn't like where we were necessarily headed, and this YIMBY urbanist movement of things. So it was creating chatter for no reason other than creating chatter. I think the oddest thing that I had from a constituent was there's a neighborhood right by UT Austin called Hancock, and I had a resident reach out to me and said, "Hey, I want you to come and tour my streets." I went with the staffer. We walked around. They're like, "Hey, if you eliminate parking mandates, if you eliminate parking, it's gonna cause XYZ things." And, one by one, we kind of like dissected what their worry was and was like, hey, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. The last thing they said was, well, if you eliminate parking mandates, it'll make it easier. And this was their words, quoting them exactly. They said it would be easier for a terrorist to attack my neighborhood, which was the most oddest and bizarre thing that argument I've heard against eliminating parking mandates. So anyway, I think the biggest thing, my takeaway was people are fear of the unknown. It's our responsibility to educate constituents before we bring forward any item. It's to do proper outreach, right? It's to attend the neighborhood meetings. It's to have workshops or one-on-ones on our end. And then now seeing the item, obviously having passed, uh, anyone who's been able to kind of work with this new item, with elimination of parking mandates, have been really happy. Like we haven't heard any complaints from anyone around this parking situation, like around parking. And the only thing that we hear are folks who will bring up, oh, I can't park anywhere anymore, which has nothing to do with the item. So for us, it's just about educating your constituents, doing the proper outreach. Most of the time, people are unsure or not for it. Once you do that, you kind of win over people. But there's always going to be a group of people who just never like what you're doing.
I have a super brief answer, and I appreciate the council member's answer. And I'll just say I am not a local elected official, so what I'm about to say, I can say. I don't know if a parking minimums discussion is ever great, is like ever particularly fun in the public discourse. I think it's always messy. I think it's always a little bit too nuanced for the way the public needs to understand it. And I think like the Parking Reform Network and other institutions have made a lot of strides. Like I think like when I see this brought up at local councils, there's always a few people who are like, I don't know who you are, and you're saying amazing things. Like so it's great. But what I am really, and I don't think there's a good case example for this yet, Isabella, but I would love to like see more, is if we can start thinking about like to sort of the whole point of this, like moving from that world of scarcity to abundance, in the sense of like the conversation about parking minimums is to me one about scarcity, but the one about something like parking benefits districts is one about potential abundance. And so like could we have a conversation like, in other words, what has congestion pricing in New York led for the congestion pricing conversations elsewhere? Is there a sort of similar example with parking benefits districts where we can actually start having a more positive open dialogue with the community about the benefits of a policy, rather than like the nuanced niche, frankly, like what I would call under the table conversation about parking minimums that I want to get done without a big fuss about it. So that's my sort of not elected official answer for you.
Ruben has a question. Please unmute.
Yep. Give me 1 second. Hey guys. So I mean, first question, Councilmember Qadri, can you come to Houston? Like, I know so many of the Houston council members that I'd just love to get you in a room with, start talking about this stuff. I'm at Strong Towns, Houston. We've been pushing this for a minute now.
Yeah, no. So,
Uh,
so don't want to say too much, but some Houston council members have actually reached out to our office to talk about parking. I don't know how public it is, so I won't say who it is, but I'm actually meeting, I believe, with 2 or 3 council members from Houston around this. So I'm really excited for those convos.
Cool. I've been bugging the hell out of them about parking reform, so maybe
It
I,
worked.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So and my actual question is a little more broadly about the abundance movement and affordability, because it seems like I mean, in Houston, I know we have a huge supply of housing. We have no zoning, we have minimum lot sizes that are shrunk down to like 1,400 square feet, which is now the statewide requirement. Thanks to some new housing reform. Shout out Felicity. And so but a lot of these houses are still, subject to 30-year mortgages and soon to be 50-year mortgages, and they're really unaffordable. So I guess, and I apologize, I have not read the book yet, but what can the abundance movement do to kind of help unlock the missing middle housing that's much more affordable for entry-level home buyers?
Yeah. So admittedly, I haven't read the whole book either. So I'm going to answer just for the whole missing middle conversation. I think there's a lot of really great stuff that here in Austin that we've worked on to address missing middle. the home initiative brought forward by former council member Leslie Poole. There was Home Part One and Home Part Two. A lot of the stuff actually you're mentioning, Houston. It had to do with item had to do with like making it easier to build ADUs. More homes on smaller lots and all that stuff. So and we've already kind of seen it go into effect around the city, and I've heard positive stories. The city actually did an analysis, 1 year after home, and a report came out, and it showed that, displacement hasn't, I think the arguments from some folks who didn't want a home was that, displacement would be off the charts. That hasn't been the case. And, we've seen folks using home how it was intended to be used, and we've seen largely positive outcomes. So, I don't think I'm answering your question, but I think in Austin we continue to bring forward different items, whether it be around parking or Councilor Poole's home initiatives, or ETOD, which is something that Councilor Harper Madison had brought forward. And I think Councilor Vella has also worked on that has addressed the whole missing middle population in the city.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, since that's my bread and butter is just housing. So I actually think Austin's a great example. We actually have 3 members of the Austin City Council in our network. Each of them has sort of spearheaded different policies. I think the other one that your colleague Chito Vella spearheaded was single stair reform, which I would put in a similar wonky category as parking reform, of like really hard to explain to people, and on the outside doesn't sound right, but actually does a lot. Right. In housing, there's no silver bullets. And so it's about attacking on all fronts. And you really sort of have to go after a number of these inherent issues that have led to the affordability and supply crisis that we have today. And it's layering all those. But a lot of that comes to looking at your community, right? If you're not building above a certain height, then like the single stair doesn't matter as much, right? We have Burhan Azeen in our group. He's done the 6-story upzoning in Cambridge. And so it's layering. Oftentimes, what we find, it's the biggest obstacle for elected officials is not the what. It's actually not these policies. They've heard a lot about the policies. It's the how. How did you get it done? What was the conversation you had in the community? What messaging was there blowback? It's the how. And that's actually a lot harder to access. So we spend a lot of time connecting members who want to do things with the members who've done things so that they can learn directly from them. And then I'm going to give another plug I feel like I'm a broken record for promoting like all these different groups that do great messaging work. It's also about saying the right things and framing the conversation right. So I just put in the chat a link to the Pro Homes Messaging Toolkit. It was sort of the predecessor to the research I just mentioned on parking reform messaging. And this was done on middle housing. And how do you have that conversation? And I can tell you, I've worked on housing for over a decade. I was doing everything wrong. Most of the people in my group who took the training were doing one thing wrong. We were saying the wrong words. We were saying supply or units. These are the wrong words. So even just having the right words, leverage these tools, that matters. And that'll help you get further along.
We're closing in on an hour here. I think we could maybe take one final question if anybody's got a quick one. Or we could, I'm just looking at the chat too to see if we missed anything in there.
That's been great. I just want to say that.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your contributions there. I see one question in the chat that we didn't answer. It's kind of a bit of a wonky policy one. Has anyone been able to get zoning reform that requires any new size parking structure that they build because they think the market or the lender requires it to make that parking structure convertible to other uses in the future? I kind of know my general sense of an answer to that. I don't know if anybody else is familiar. I know in Austin there's been at least discussion about parking podiums, and their kind of proliferation downtown. Um, my understanding is from an actual construction perspective that that conversion is costly and not easy to do as a general rule, even if the floor plates are flat. But I don't know how you're looking at that in terms of policy. That's kind of a bit more of a wonky question. Mark says not something you've pursued specifically.
Yeah, it's something we've heard, but we've kind of heard Daniel, you just said about the the financial aspect of that being a little bit costly.
Mhm. That by far the easier policy lift, as I understand it, is trying to discourage the construction of excess parking to begin with.
Yeah, that's sort of how I feel about it. We in California we have quite a lot of fees because of Prop 13. If you're in a state that's in a similar position, and so I've thought quite a bit about how do we target our fees against parking in a way that might cause some challenges on the development side, but at the end of the day, it's sort of I think getting to that it's sort of tying the fee to the negative externality that we need to be tying it to. So um, yeah. Daniel, do you mind if I just at least I say one final quick thing? I know as we wrap up here.
Yeah, I think let's let everybody kind of get a last word in here. There's a lot we could talk about if we could keep going for hours, but I don't think I think people have stuff to get to. So yeah, please.
Well, I think the only things I'll just sort of end on are one, I'd encourage everyone, I was not asked to say this. I want to say that. I was encourage everyone to donate and support the Parking Reform Network and like the amazing work that PRN does. It's quite helpful to Streets for All. It's quite helpful across the whole country to really do this work. So that's one thing I wanted to say, and I please remember that. The other thing I want to say is I just also encourage all of you to be really passionate stewards of your local government and really pay attention to your local governments, regardless of whether you're pushing something at that given moment. That it is like so often that I am like watching a boring city council meeting in the background that I like learn something about the way that my local electeds think or the way that the bureaucrats are talking to them about a problem that makes me a better lobbyist, a better advocate, and better and a more pragmatic person when I'm in the policy arena. And so I encourage you all that if you're not attending like most or everyone attending, watching on YouTube, whatever it is for you, most of your city council meetings because you're just waiting for the one on the bike lane or the parking issue or the whatever, that you actually might be doing a disservice to yourself because like you actually might not know all the dynamics there and you're going to be a better advocate when you know those dynamics and honestly, because so few people do that at the local level, you will have a leg up. When I'm working at the state level, there's tons of paid lobbyists that I'm next to all the time who do that work professionally. But when I do that in my local city, I live in Orange County, California, I'm usually the only one who understands how the city council actually functions.
I know we're at time, so I'm not going to add anything. I'm just going to say thank you all for caring and doing this work. This is really hard work, and but it's going to solve some problems that'll matter to people's lives. So keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make my comments super short too. I also have a 2 o'clock. I appreciate everyone on this call. I think it's all the work that's being done is very much a labor of love. And then just going off of Ruben, I think it's extremely important for collaboration and conversations to occur. Whether it's you talking to your city council member or your city council member talking to a city council member from another city or state. I'm a part of Local Progress and National League of Cities, and I'm constantly looking to have conversations with counterparts in other parts of the country to see like what good stuff are you doing? What can we, replicate here in Austin? Or maybe, what can we teach, other parts of the country? And I think that's what our Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville trip was. So, I'm really excited about the conversation I'm going to have with folks in Houston. I lived in Houston for a year and a half. So it does mean I'm also a Rockets fan. So it means so much to me to see the great work that we're doing in Austin replicated in other parts of the country and state.
Cool. Well, guys, I think is that it for us? Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe and Giselle and Mark. And then turn your attention to the chat. I think Paul is going to put some links in there for our upcoming events. And then also there's going to be a link to the feedback form. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the session. And why don't we can all unmute and say goodbye, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.